Hey everyone, if you are joining us this evening, I am so excited that you're able to join us. Um, my name is Anna Letts Johnson. I'm the education manager for the San Diego River Valley Conservancy. And we really wanted to keep engaging with our community, especially as we're listening to the stay at home order that's going on right now, and still find a way where we can interact with nature and especially interact with one another. So, this is totally new for us, and thanks for bearing with us. If there's any technology things that are going on, please let me know. But today we're going to focus on pollinators. And I hope that you were able to watch the video that we posted the past few days. And if you're here, go ahead and leave a comment below. I would love to say hi to you. I know a couple people that were planning on joining. And so, a little bit about the Conservancy, if you've never heard of us before. The San Diego River Valley Conservancy is a 501(c) nonprofit. We focus mainly on environmental things, and we focus on the San Diego watershed, which starts all the way up in Julian and then travels its way down through Ramona, Escondido, Rancho Santa Fe, and ends in Del Mar. If anyone is familiar with Dog Beach or the Del Mar Fairgrounds, that is where our water ends. So our river is 55 miles long, and we have a great amount of diversity in our watershed that comes in for plants and wildlife, anything from mammals to insects and things like that. So it's a really amazing organization where we get to partner with other people, whether that's the community, corporations, other nonprofits, to be able to preserve and protect and share our natural resources that we have here in San Diego, because we enjoy them so much and we want to be able to keep them for the next generation. So the three main things that our organization focuses on is recreation, so building out trails where people can go hiking or biking. Even some are open to equestrians as well. The other thing that we do is conservation projects. So we have an awesome conservation manager named Jonathan Applebaum, and he and lots of teams of people will actually go out into the field after we've purchased land or gotten access to land, and we can restore that habitat to native species so wildlife can come back in and also reduce fire risk. And the last thing that we do is education, which is what I do. It's definitely been a huge adaptation to learn how to interact with the community and educate remotely. So I think our current situation is stretching us, but it's allowing us to really appreciate each other and nature in a whole new way. So if I'm glancing a little bit, I just have a couple notes to keep myself on track, because if you know anything about me, I really love to talk about nature. And as a reminder, if you're just hopping on, my name is Anna and I work for the Conservancy. I'm the education manager. So the video that we posted over the past few days was called The Beauty of Pollination. And I think it's such a fitting video for this time of year, because I know I have a couple sycamores outside of my house, and it's been so beautiful to watch the leaves grow back as they do annually. And it's really, really awesome just to be able to see that even though things might seem uncertain right now, that there's still a lot of certainty in nature, and things are growing back. Our pollinators are really active. My dog likes to try to interact with the pollinators, especially bees. But first, to start off with, I see some people hopping in the comments. So hello to everyone. If you know what pollination is, why don't you go ahead and type just a little response. So pollination is definitely a word that we hear a lot, or like, why is it important? And how does that affect me personally? And I hope you were able to see, if you got the chance to watch the Beauty of Pollination video, that there are lots of different pollinators that are moving around us, even if we don't notice them. And they're really contributing to something much bigger than we can imagine. So if you've never heard of what exactly pollination is, or if you have little ones around you that are unsure of, like, what is pollination? Pollination, really simply put, is pollen moving from one flower to another. So if you get deeper into it, yes, it's more complex, but at its root, it's moving that yellow dust that you see. If you've ever rubbed the inside of a flower, you'll get that yellow dust on your fingers. And so that's moving from one flower to another. And then what comes from that is food. So that pollen moves from flower to flower. But we really want to ask, how is that pollen moving? Who is moving that pollen? And the pollinators that we most often see are actually displayed in the YouTube video that we shared. So some of the different pollinators that we saw were bees, lots of different bees. We also saw butterflies, and those are some of my favorites, and hummingbirds and bats. And there's one other one that people might not think of in particular. What is a type of pollinator that can help move pollen from flower to flower? Can be gusty, a little temperamental. It's wind. So if it's windy enough, especially, I know a lot of people right now are having allergies and they're sneezing a ton, that's pollen. That pollen usually is what's agitating your sinuses, and it makes you all stuffed up and sinusy and sneezing. So wind is actually a pollinator. So it can move that pollen from one flower to another, and sometimes really far distances. And that's the cool thing about the different types of pollinators we discussed. Like bees, butterflies, birds like hummingbirds, and also bats. They travel really, really long distances in order to move that pollen from flower to flower. And they don't just do it for fun. Animals are definitely, or wildlife is definitely getting benefit out of this when they're pollinating. So the reason why these pollinators are pollinating is because of something that's usually inside the flowers. If anybody knows, go ahead and comment. Why are pollinators going towards these flowers? What do they have that's so precious to them? And we'll give a little backstory. Most people enjoy putting honey in their tea, or even in baked goods. And the bees wouldn't be able to make honey unless they ate something. Starts with an N, and it's called nectar. It's this really sugary, sticky substance that these different pollinators will go ahead and eat. And that will help give them a lot of energy, so they're able to go from flower to flower to flower, and then eventually back either to their nest or to their cave or to their hive. And it's a really good resource for them, and it's something called a symbiotic relationship. And a symbiotic relationship is when both parties, so the flower and the pollinator, are benefiting from that relationship. So we have our pollinator, for example, a bee, who's going for that nectar because they're really hungry. They want to go back to the hive to be able to make honey. But what's in it for the flower? Definitely pollination. And the reason why we want pollination to happen is so more and more generations of these plants can grow. And so the bee will travel from flower to flower, moving that pollen, and then eventually pollinating the plants. And then they get the nice little benefit of the nectar, which I said is really sugary and strong. So they're able to keep up the energy and be sustained while they're out, and they can stay alert. And another reason that they're attracted to flowers is because they're bright color. It's kind of like if you're walking by something and you see something shiny and it catches your eye. It's quite similar for pollinators. They have different types of eyes than people do, especially insects. They're very, very different. They see things in a different realm than we do. So these bright colors really attract pollinators to their flower, so in the hopes of continuing on their legacy. That is the purpose of most wildlife. That's the thought process is, I'm eating so I can continue my next generation. I'm finding shelter so I can continue my next generation. And the same thing with plants. They want to figure out, how are we going to reproduce? And this is how they do it, is they have bright colors and they have really yummy nectar. So all of those different pollinators will go in there, and they actually have different adaptations in order to be able to eat that nectar and get to it. So if you noticed, hummingbirds, they have a very particular type of beak. I always ask my students when we do pollinator studies, are they really short and fat beaks? Or are they long and thin? And hummingbirds have long and thin beaks, so they can eat the nectar from certain types of flowers that look more like tubes. They're quite narrow, so they can stick their beak all the way into the flower, and they have a very long tongue in order to eat the nectar. So they have different adaptations that allow them to eat certain types of nectar from these plants that maybe other pollinators wouldn't be able to eat. So and the reason that pollinators are important, does anybody want to give me a reason? Why do you think that pollinators are important? If we have all of these bees and butterflies and bats and wind and birds moving around this pollen from plant to plant, why does that matter? I'm curious what you guys are thinking. And while you guys are thinking, maybe with whoever you're sitting with, or if you're sitting alone, go ahead, pop in the comments. I'll take a sip of my water that I have. So the reason that, pollinators are so important is that for humans, they create so much of the foods that we see in the supermarket. The majority of the crops that we see in our supermarket, it's actually estimated at about 75% of the crops that we see in our supermarkets or at our farmers markets, that is from the result of pollination. So when that pollen is moved from one flower to another, it's able to be fertilized and create these fruits, usually in food. And so the food will grow. Let's use an orange as an example. So oranges will start out as a flower, and then they'll grow and grow and grow into fruits. And then, of course, that's what we eat. So that's a really, really important role that pollinators are playing, is creating food, not only for us, but obviously wildlife also. When wildlife eats fruit or types of fruit that have seeds in it, they actually can spread those seeds. I see a couple of you mentioning that. That's a really good point, is that when they eat the fruits, they usually eat the seeds. Humans, not so much. We try to pick them out like watermelons. And what they'll do is they might scurry back somewhere back towards their home, or they continue foraging. And then when their droppings come out, the seeds will actually still be intact, and that's ways for the plant to spread its cover, if you say. So the majority of crops that we see and fruit that we see is actually from pollinators, about 75%. And one point that I think is really surprising, even for myself, is without pollinators, not a lot of our wild plants that don't necessarily have a purpose for people, so they don't create the foods that we eat, they wouldn't exist. So it's estimated that about 80 to 90% of all plant life on the globe requires pollinators' assistance in order for their populations to grow. So if pollinators weren't around, these plants would definitely not reach as far, and their generations would be few and far between. So we would be at a really, really big threat of losing these plants. And without these plants, they play a really, really vital role. So these plants, what happens if plants disappear? If our pollinators disappear and our plants disappear, something else will also disappear. Let's see if anyone has any thoughts on that. And I really hope you guys did get a chance to go ahead and watch that Beauty of Pollination video. It's really cool because they have it sped up really fast. So you can see the flowers blooming and opening up in the daylight, and it's awesome. So I love that. But what happens if those plants disappear? Back to one of our earlier questions is, if our plants disappear, then that means that there's no habitat left. And if there's no habitat left, then that means that, yes, our food resources will definitely disappear. But that also means that our wildlife won't have anywhere to safely move in an urban area or even in a wild area. They won't have enough resources in order to hunt their prey, to make their nests, things like that. So it's a huge amount of suffering if our pollinators disappear. They're really our backbone to not only what we need as people, but also what our communities need, our wildlife communities and our plant communities. So one other thing that I wanted to mention was, how is climate change affecting pollinators? So this is something that we hear a lot, talking about climate change from a global standpoint. We're seeing average rise in temperature, and that it's getting hotter for longer periods of time. We're seeing drought all over the place. We're seeing really intense moments of weather, that like hurricanes, more severe, and things like that. So what does that mean for pollinators? Does anybody know what happens if things start to get warmer too soon? What will happen? What usually happens after a lot of rain and it gets really, really warm? It rains and it starts to warm. Springtime. So springtime happens. And when springtime happens, all the flowers come out and all the pollinators are happy because they have a bunch of nectar to eat, and the plants are really happy because that means that their population is growing and their pollen is moving, and we're able to eat more food and things like that. But what happens now because of climate change is that spring is starting to happen at an earlier point in the year. And it's a really fancy term. It's called phenological mismatch. And so it's kind of like, these flowers are blooming way too early and the pollinators weren't ready for that. And then by the time that the pollinators are ready to go out to all of those flowers, there's no longer any food for them to eat. And when there's no food for these pollinators to eat, of course, their populations decrease dramatically. So phenological mismatch is a really huge problem because it's representative to all of the global warming that's happening, average temperature rise that's happening on our planet. And it's definitely regional as well. We're experiencing a lot of regional effects from climate change that will affect our pollinators also. And without these pollinators, like we talked about, then our plants wouldn't be able to grow, and no plants means no wildlife. So these are really important things to conserve and to talk about, because we need to figure out ways to get to the root of helping our community in a way that's longstanding and holistic in perspective. So a couple examples that I just wanted to give you before I do my amazing demonstration for you guys is we're going to be talking about one particular species called a monarch butterfly. If you guys noticed in the Beauty of Pollination video, the monarch butterfly and there were tons of them migrating. There were massive amounts of them, so dense, incredibly beautiful. So, their population is up in the Northeast US, Canada, and then they make a 3,000-mile journey to Mexico. This is an annual migration, and they are amazing pollinators, and they can only eat one type of food as a caterpillar. Does anybody know what their caterpillars eat? It starts with an M. There's a couple different subspecies that a lot of people like to plant in San Diego here, which is great because they have food to eat. It starts with an M. Our monarch butterflies, when they're caterpillars, they're eating something. They are eating something called milkweed. So it's this really amazing plant, and they are matched up, buddy buddies, and that's the only thing the caterpillars will eat. That's where their eggs are laid, and then they'll eventually turn into their chrysalis, hatch, and then wait for their wings to get all strong, and then fly off and continue their migration. So when we talk about wildlife needing plants, that's a prime example, because not all wildlife is adapted to a wide range of different foods that they'll eat in different environments. They're more specially adapted, regionally adapted to live a certain way. And that's a really good example for monarchs, is that if they don't have the proper food, that one plant, then their populations will starkly decrease. And since the 1980s, it's estimated that 95% of their population is gone. So we have a very, very small amount of these pollinators remaining, and we already talked about why they're quite important. And then the last tidbit that I wanted to talk to you guys about is, does anybody know how many bee species San Diego has? Native bee species. We have quite a few. And a lot of people think, I always think about the Bee movie. I think it was Jerry Seinfeld that was in that, but talking about like the importance of pollination. And I think that's such a great demonstration for people to understand that, without bees or without any pollinators, we wouldn't have any food and a lot of things would collapse. But they're also just stunning and really interesting to watch their behaviors. But if you didn't know, we have over 600 native bee species within the county. That is a ton. So just like how we talked about how monarchs have these specific type of foods and environments that they prefer to live in, it's the same thing with these bees. These very specially adapted, regionally adapted species have to San Diego. So they play a really important role in helping our native plants be able to survive and to thrive, which then in turn positively affects our different wildlife species, whether that's small mammals that are eating the fruits, and then eventually the bigger predators will have something to eat as well. So it's a cyclical pattern that's just so fun to learn about. And we have about 5 minutes left, so I wanted to show you guys a quick little activity that I like to do with my students when we're doing a pollinator program, and that is coloring your own butterfly. So this is really fun. If you have any little kiddos at home, or younger family members or friends, or even just as an adult, this is really fun. I like to, what I'll do is I'll draw like a couple flowers, simple flowers, and you can tape them around your home and maybe make it like a little game. And you can use a printout of like a shape of a butterfly. And one thing I always like to remind our students is butterflies match on both sides. Their wings match on both sides, their colors. So they mirror each other. And so we like to, when I do this in the classroom, we always remind everyone, we want to make sure that our butterfly matches on both sides and it's all the way colored in. If you guys are interested in getting this blank printout, it's just a little dotted border, please email the Conservancy. Our email is sdrvc@sdrvc.org. And I'd be happy to send you a copy of these. They're so much fun. So then we talk about a really good way to visualize what pollination is, especially even as adults. I think it can be kind of hard to imagine, why are these different pollinators visiting these spaces? Why is it important? How are they affecting us? How is it going to change as climate change becomes more and more prevalent? So a good example of this is like, how are these butterflies moving? And so I'm going to do a quick little cutout of these. You can obviously spend much more time on this. I suggest using crayons if you're using regular printer paper, or even if you don't have printer paper right now, or you don't have ink, or you just don't have a printer at all, you can go ahead and draw your own butterfly. And you can make it work. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. And then I would have my butterflies placed, my flowers placed all around the house. Kind of make it like a little scavenger hunt. And the goal is to pollinate, because pollination is important for plants, wildlife, and people. So that's something that we try to reinforce over and over again, that everything that we do here at the Conservancy and in our our conservation programs is from a holistic perspective, that of course we want to be able to protect highly sensitive or endangered species, but usually a good benefit of that is it means that the whole surrounding habitat and ecosystem around that benefits greatly. So that's what we try to do, is go from big concepts and apply it to a regional scale. So this is my beautiful butterfly. It matches on both sides. And so what this does, it has two little lines. If you can see, it has two lines in the middle. And so you go ahead, fold your butterfly in half. Fold your butterfly in half, and you see those two lines? You're just going to cut one of those lines, and you're going to go ahead and cut the second. So when you open up your butterfly, now you have this little gap down below, and you have your very own butterfly finger puppet. So you're able to go around, pollinate the flowers in your home or in your backyard or in your neighborhood, and give some love to our wonderful plants and see how it feels to be a pollinator. It requires a lot of energy. That's why they love that sweet nectar, and we are so appreciative of their hard work. So that's what I have for you guys this evening. If you have any questions, I got a couple minutes left, and I would love to answer anything maybe that has come up or that you had noticed in the video that you thought was interesting and maybe you weren't too sure about. So I'll keep an eye on the comments, and thank you guys for commenting, for being here. I've been keeping an eye on them. You guys are so awesome, and we really appreciate you as a community, and we really, really hope that when the time is right, we'll all be able to gather again in the outdoors and in nature, where I know most of us would prefer to be. And with that, we have another scheduled Facebook Live for next Wednesday, same time at 6:30 to 7. And we will be posting our resource for the week, which is going to be doing a carbon footprint quiz. And since next Wednesday, April 22nd, is Earth Day. It's the 50th official Earth Day, which is incredible. It sparked so many movements to be able to keep our water and our air clean, preserve land, and we are so thankful for that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that next week. If you could go ahead and try to take that resource that we're going to post, it's a little quiz to see how many trees it would take in order for you to offset the amount of carbon that you create in 1 year. I already took it before, and I'm not looking forward to sharing my results next week, but I'll do it anyway. So go ahead, do that quiz. We'll be posting it. If you guys have any other questions in between now and then, please, like I said, go ahead and email us, the Conservancy, at sdrvc@sdrvc.org. Again, my name is Anna Lutz Johnson. I'm the Education Manager for the San Diego River Valley Conservancy. We hope you're doing well out there, and we really appreciate you joining us this evening. Have a good night, guys.